It's very important for you to understand that confusion is a good thing. Whenever you're confused, you should be grateful. Right? So what I'm talking about here is not changing that. That'll change if you practice meditation, but I'm not talking about changing that. I am talking about the fact that if you practice meditation and you understand the truth, and the truth is, what you're experiencing in your mind is not what's happening in the world. That's the truth, right? And you don't know the difference. That's why you're suffering all the time, because the mind's operating with a basic understanding or a basic design, if you want to call it, basic programming, right? That things are a certain way. The mind's operating with a program that says things are a certain way, right? And whenever they appear in the world not to be consistent with that, the mind gets upset. This isn't right. This isn't wrong. This needs to change. I have to try and change this. I have to try and control this, right? And so you get busy at that. You get busy because you're following the dictates of the mind, right? You're living in the tyranny of the mind. And so you're following what it tells you to do, right? So it tells you to seek relief. It tells you to seek relief at any cost. Seek relief if you don't want to suffer, right? And so then you have a choice between all kinds of different things. You know, you have alcohol, you have marijuana, you have, you know, television hypnotism, you know, you have prescribed medication, you have sleeping a lot. You even have becoming obsessed with physical exercise as a way of avoiding yourself, of avoiding being you, avoiding experiencing what it's like to be you. If I can keep my attention involved out there in the world, doing things that I think will make me happy and help me avoid suffering, then that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to keep all my attention out there, and I'll keep moving it around from one thing to another. You know, as long as the same operation is happening in terms of it's helping me not to pay much attention to what's going on in my mind, I'll be good. The only problem with that is what's going on in your mind when you ignore it starts to build up. Starts to build up, right? Starts to build up and become more desperate because you're ignoring it. It becomes more desperate, right? And so then something happens that triggers the mind into a very extreme state of emotion and very extreme state of thought, right? Radical thinking, desperate thinking, right? And when that happens, because you haven't been attending to it and taking care of it, right? It totally overwhelms reality and has you believe that it now makes sense to kill the body and kill some more bodies before you leave this experience. That'll be your final way out. That'll be the final conclusion to dealing with your life, is to remove yourself from the experience. So that's what we're seeing happen more often than not, right? The stress levels are going up, especially because of the political situations that exist now. You know, one of the things that my friend David shared was when him and his wife were very interested in the election, as most people were, because there's a lot at stake in this election, right? It's sanity versus insanity. And they were, you know, they were concerned as everybody else watching the election and everything. And then in the middle of all that, she got very ill, right? And her life was now on the line. Guess how important the election was? You see? You see how that goes? Yeah. When something replaces it that the mind considers to be even more disturbing than the election, then the election's not disturbing. See how that goes? It's all a mental process. It's like I said to somebody here earlier. The truth is relatively simple. This is a very temporary visit you and I are on, okay? We are not this physical piece that we identify with, okay? This is a very temporary visit. We are not this physical piece that we identify with. This physical piece is going to die, and we don't know when that's going to happen, and we don't know what's going to happen next. It's totally unpredictable. That's the truth. That's the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, right? But we don't live in relationship to that, do we? No, we live in relationship to a whole different reality, right? We live in relationship to a reality the mind's generating called, I'm gonna live forever. There was even a song. Anybody know that song, I'm Gonna Live Forever? Yeah, it was in that movie. What was the movie? Fame. I'm going to live forever, right? Yeah, the mind has you figured out to live forever, right? And so when anything occurs in your awareness that counteracts that talks about death, right? The mind reacts like, that's disturbing, that's upsetting, right? You know, my Zen teacher calls it the D word. Whenever you bring up the D word, the mind starts to react, ah, ah, right? So that's how you're living your life. You're living a life. Everything that's happening. You get up in the morning, when you look out the window, it's raining, right? Then you get in your car and you turn the key and the battery's dead, By lunchtime, you want to kill yourself. You see what I'm saying? So that's living, that's using your mind to live your life. That's allowing your mind, allowing a very limited program that is designed only for survival and to reject anything else that happens, right? You're identified with that, and because you're identified with that, your life is miserable. It's miserable because the model you are using to relate to life doesn't relate to life. The model you're using to live your life doesn't relate to life. It's different from the way life is. That's why we say when you practice meditation and you succeed over time to relax the physical body and calm the mind, you start seeing things as they are. And you get related to things as they are. When you get related to things as they are, the upset stops happening because you're not comparing it to a model that's dramatically different from the way it is and getting upset all day long because the world won't fit the model. The world doesn't fit the model. People won't fit my model of who they should be being. If they could only get it together, if they could only ask me who they should be, I'll tell them, and then they could be that way and we'd get along fine, right? That's the mental thing. If the world was only different, I'd be happy. If other people were only different, I'd be happy. If I was only different, I'd be happy, right? This is just an upset waiting to happen, right? The mind is an upset waiting to happen, right? Because it's constantly comparing the model that it is to what's happening, right? And it very seldom fits, right? So when we practice meditation, what we're doing is moving our attention away from this never-ending monkey mind, narrator, news commentator, neurotic process. We're moving our attention away from that and just simplifying the whole situation by focusing on the belly moving and the body breathing. And when I focus on the body breathing, and I'm doing that as awareness, that's the only possibility. It's a different experience, isn't it? When you're really there long enough with the breath, when you're really there long enough with the body breathing to actually take note of what that experience is, right? And now that takes a while to even be there that long. That's why most people can't tolerate the practice of meditation, because it doesn't happen fast enough, right? But if you're committed, if you understand the truth and you're convinced of the truth and you're committed to the truth, then how long it takes to practice meditation for you to have a direct experience of that does not matter, because it's true anyway. Do you understand that? You know, if you're clear about what your true nature is, then it shouldn't matter how long it takes to have that as a direct experience, because it's true anyway. Do you understand? You're not going to die anyway. Even if you still believe you're going to die, you're not going to die, right? So all you're doing when you practice meditation is relaxing in such a way that the way things are can be the way things are. That's all. They're already that way, and you're already what you are. So there's nothing that has to change. You know, there's nothing that has to get fixed. There's nothing that needs to be different. You know, if your mind hears that, the mind will say, no, that doesn't seem to fit the way I see it. There's a lot that needs to be changed, a lot that needs to be different, the way I see it, you know? Well, that's because you don't know the difference between you and your mind. Right? Another way of talking about this is to say everything is perfect as it is. In the teaching of Sogen Buddhism, which is a very high teaching, one of the reasons I love that teaching is they start at the end. They start at the end. They start in the very beginning of the teaching saying, this is who you are, this is how it is. Now practice being aware of that. Practice resting as awareness for brief moments. Instead of having the teaching be the beginning and the realization be on the end, no, I'll have the realization be in the beginning. Right? Now you may not be having that experience, but you understand the concept, right? And you can understand the teachings because the teachings make perfect sense. They're a perfect fit for the way things are, right? And because that's the case, and because the people that are speaking about this didn't just show up from a dark alley, you know, the people that are speaking about this come from a lineage that goes back thousands of years. And there are contemporary people who are speaking about this that are experiencing it in a contemporary sense and can speak about it in a contemporary way, which includes the understanding that we have from psychology, right, about the mind and so forth. So you have available to you now more information and more opportunities to wake up and experience the truth. You have more available to you now as a human being than has ever existed in the history of humanity. That's at your fingertips. At your fingertips. You have all the wisdom teachings at your fingertips. You have all the contemporary teachers that are out there today translating the truth into meaningful communication that can get through your systems and get through to you so that you can be aware of it, so that you can recognize it. That's available. But with all that being the case, the one thing that's not available, right, that you have to work with, right, is the understanding of thy will be done. You know, the understanding that your will is an illusion. You know, when you believe that you're doing things, right, you're just experiencing things in a very limited way, right? And I don't say that, I'm not trying to talk religion here when I say thy will be done, you know. I'm just saying that's scientifically the case. Even quantum physicists today are saying that they can't disagree with that being the case. If you see the teachings as concepts that point to the truth that are not the truth, and the experience of the truth is only available through practice, then there's no problem. But if you take the concepts to be the truth and you try and live yourself and try and live according to that, you're going to suffer worse than you ever did. Yeah. So that's the difference. You know, the difference is to understand that, yeah, the teachings are important because that's the carrot. The teachings are the carrot. The teachings are designed to get the personality interested, right? Because what are we saying? We're talking to the personality, and we're saying to the personality, you don't have to keep suffering. You can be free. You can actually be enjoying your life. You can be having a good time. You could be relaxed. You could really enjoy the experience of being alive, because it is true that the experience you're having of existing is a precious mystery. And if that's your orientation, if you're living from that precious mystery and you understand the significance and the preciousness of that, then the rest of this doesn't compare. So the source of your well-being is that. Your source of well-being is the experience of your existence, right? It's experience of your existence, right? So you're already fulfilled. Do you understand? If you experience the preciousness of the fact that you exist to be the source of your well-being, right? You're fulfilled. That's it, it's over. You're fulfilled. Now when you go out and live your life, you know, you can play the game wholeheartedly. You can play the game with abandonment because you're not trying to protect yourself. You're not trying to avoid pain. You know, you're not trying to make it reality conform to where your mind is. You're not doing that anymore. You're just willing to allow life to be the way it is, which means you're willing to experience loss. That's all. You're willing to experience loss. So when loss occurs, you experience the loss. You don't reject the emotional experience that happens. You're experiencing the loss, right? And if you're willing to experience loss, and that's consistent with reality because everything comes and goes, right? Yeah, you're willing to experience loss because that's consistent with the way things really are, because everything comes and goes, and you will lose everything, so you better get good at losing, right? And if you're willing to experience loss, loss is no longer the boogeyman. If you're willing to experience loss and you experience loss and you experience the emotions that appear in the mind related to having the loss, that'll pass, right? And then you're back into the experience of enjoying your life. It's a temporary situation. But if you're not willing to experience loss, and when it happens, you reject it and you resist it and you deny it and you can't stop thinking about it because it shouldn't have happened, how am I going to go on with my life, right? Now, then you're stuck. You're stuck just because you're not willing to have your experience be consistent with the way things are. That's all. That's all. That's all these practices and teachings are, is trying to get you in line with reality, trying to get you experiencing things the way things are instead of comparing them all the time to a mental state that will never be the same as the way things are. It will never be the same as the way things are. So it doesn't even matter. See, that's one of the things that you have to come to understand. Once you see things the way they really are, you're not trying to control your mind anymore. You're not trying to change your mind anymore. You're just trying to patiently allow it to get over its upset. You're just patiently allowing it to continue to get over its upset. And the way you do that is you're not going to be involved. You're not going to be a cheerleader for your crazy mind. Right? When it's upset, you're just being with it. You're having compassion for it because you know it doesn't have to suffer. Right? You're just being with it. You have compassion for it. And so because of your absence, because you're not getting involved with this project, because you're not getting involved in trying to change everything, right? That this project starts to lose its validity. It just starts to die a natural death. And as it dies a natural death, what you're left with is the way things really are. Because the superimposition of your conditioning is no longer running the show. But that conditioning was an inevitability. That conditioning had to happen. You see, you have to understand this.
That makes total sense.
That conditioning had to happen because you couldn't be here as the awareness. The awareness could not be here without taking form. And once it took form, it had to identify with the form in order to have a human life. It wouldn't work any other way. See, if you were here as the awareness and you knew the truth from the very beginning, what's the point? You see what I'm saying? But if you're here, if you come into this world and you lose your contact with the reality of your true nature, right? And you understand that's just a process, and most human beings go from the innocence of the baby to learning the name and taking themselves to be the physical body. And then the suffering that occurs there is intended to provoke them to seek freedom, to seek relief from the suffering, and that's what will motivate them to discover the truth and start to practice meditation. But most people get stuck in the second phase and they keep trying to make that work. And it can't work because you've got to return to the truth. You've got to return to the original reality of your true nature, the natural state. And when you return to that and you've learned how to be human as a personality, you have the best of both worlds. Now you can balance the craziness of your personality with the sanity of your awareness. That'll keep you out of trouble. See, the personality is very interested in belief, right? Because it doesn't know that it can experience the truth. Personality can experience the truth, right? It thinks it can, by believing something is true, have an interim reality it can live in, right? But that doesn't get the job done because the truth is the truth. It's not an interim reality and it's not a belief. Right? And the personality cannot experience the truth. The personality cannot experience anything. Look, this is very important for you to understand. That you've dedicated your energy and you've dedicated the living of your life, right, to a conceptual appearance, to a conceptual identity that cannot experience anything. And then you wonder why you're not happy. Right? You dedicated your life to, you've dedicated your life to an attempt to experience well-being and happiness. You've dedicated your life to that. And the identity that you're being that's dedicating your life to that doesn't exist. No wonder you're confused. No wonder you're unhappy. No wonder you're coping. No wonder you're struggling, right? Yeah, because all that struggling is just mental exhaustion, just mental activity. That's what you're doing. That's all mental activity, right? And the irony of it, the cosmic joke about it, is that while you're busy doing that, you're already where you wanted to get to all the time. You're already happy, satisfied, and at peace. But you're paying attention to something else because you believe that you're going to be able to find it there, even though there's no evidence for that. One of the reasons I like the Zen system is because it's not interested in that. It's not interested in that. It's interested in reality, and the reality that it's interested in is the present moment. And if you're interested in the present moment, which is the only real reality, right? Within that present moment lies what you're interested in more than anything, which is being happy, peaceful, and satisfied. So all this stuff about, oh, what's going to happen later, that's the personality's interest, right? But for the awareness, there is no later. This is it. This is the whole thing, right? The future, the past, the present, and the future are occurring right now, all at once at the same time. And if you're there for that, right, you're there with reality. There is nothing else. There is nothing beside that. This idea that the future is somewhere else or the past is somewhere else other than the present moment is just another belief. You know, when you understand that when you're aware of the present moment, you're aware of the whole thing. Past, present, and future. They're all within the present moment. Exposing yourself to the truth is very important. You should consider exposing yourself to the truth like getting oxygen when you're suffocating. That's the way you should relate to the truth. Because it is like that. It's not everywhere. You know, when you leave here and you go back out into the craziness, right? That's what's out there, craziness. It permeates everything. It's craziness, right? So when you're in a position to hear the truth and speak the truth and practice the truth, that's a diamond. That's special. That's precious. And you should relate to it as being precious, right? I'm not special, but the truth is, right? And I know the value of it. I know the difference it can make. That's why I'm passionate about it, and that's why I'm here. I'm not here for any other reason, right? So don't miss the opportunity for yourself. Don't do that to yourself. Come to the class on a regular basis. Over time, it will make a big difference, doesn't it? For those of you who come often, it gives you something to balance out the crazy life you're living, doesn't it? Until the time comes when it's not necessary. You know, time comes when you have practiced sufficiently and you have enough stability in your experience of your true nature that you can just relax and enjoy the ride.